right, what's up, you heathens and demons, you sinners and saints, you beautiful, blasphemous people? Welcome back to The Rage. This is The Rage Live. We're going to have a really good conversation tonight talking about, does the Jesus of the Bible, did he exist? I have my fellow atheist, Chris, the Daily Atheist here. I have this one guy who is a Christian, and praise I am that I am, who is also a Christian. So two atheists versus two Christians. This one guy will have to dip out after about an hour. Sky Out had to work, so hopefully if he gets home from work, he can dip back, he can dip in at that point. But what's up, y'all? I'll let this one guy to my right introduce himself first. What's up, this one guy?
Not much. It's good to be here today with everyone. Hope everyone's doing well, and I hope we all have a good conversation and have some fun.
Yeah, everybody's link is in the description below, except for Praises, because I reached out to him so late. I will be getting Praises link in the description below. So if you're interested in anything somebody has to say, please go subscribe to them, support them. Chris is my fellow atheist on the panel. What's up, Chris? What's up, Daily Atheist? I was just on a show.
Hello, how's it going? Solid labor, working. Ready to do the thing. Actually, I got to tell you, I didn't have any idea what was going on. I showed up and I don't normally do debates, as most people know. I thought it was just going to be a conversation between me and Nakasuchi.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I didn't clarify.
So no, my fault for not being a good researcher, right? So that's why I'm asking before this. I'm like, what's going on? Anyway, yeah, that's me. I have a Daily Atheist morning show. I have a Evil God Monster of Abraham series, going through the Bible chapter by chapter. If you'd like to check it out on YouTube, that's me. Good evening.
You know what? I think I did that too before, like, everything blew up and the show changed. So that's completely my bad. I'm glad you're here though, Chris. It's not really so much a debate. We're just talking about Jesus and yeah, like if we run out of that topic, then we can move on to another one. And I'll definitely have to get you on just for an interview stream. Totally my bad.
Oh no worries. No. It's I don't. I'm just explaining why I'm a little off guard. That's all. Not your bad, my bad for not paying attention to what was going on. I woke up from a nap and my world changed. I don't know what to do yet. I'm still parsing it out.
Yeah, I go through that all the time. If I take a nap, it takes forever.
Me too, actually. I just woke up for a nap for this. I'm like, I'm going to get some rest. That's exactly what I did.
And our last guest is Praise I Am That I Am. Been on the channel several times. I'm sure you all know who Praise is. What's up, Praise?
Yo, what's up, Nog? Yeah, this will be a good discussion. I think maybe we could bring some points out there that maybe people can think a little bit, and yeah, well, hopefully we'll see how it goes.
All right, yeah. So just to kick it off, I'm gonna kind of let the Christians go first. Maybe tell us why you believe that Jesus existed, and then I'll let Chris go, and then I'll come in and give my opinions. So yeah, we'll let this one guy, since you don't have that much time, you only get about an hour.
I think Praise is going to give you the more traditional view of it. So Praise, why don't you go ahead and take the first?
Sweet, yeah. So most of these arguments, I'm going to defer to Bart Ehrman's book that Jesus Exists. It was back in 2012, but some of these arguments he outlines, or I think the most convincing ones to me, would be the oral traditions, the Aramaic oral traditions of the Gospels, and that gives credibility to the viability of the Gospels and the existence of Jesus, because we have something that would precede the Greek transmission of the text, and then also we have non-Christian sources out there that Bart Ehrman outlines within at least 1 century. I mean, it's within 1 century, which is acceptable to a historian criteria. So there's nothing there that would lend any credence to the non-historicity of Jesus Christ. But also, we have Paul, who mentions the gospel authors. So if we have an extra biblical source that came after the biblical or the gospel authors, then we even have confirmation that the biblical authors are a legitimate source. And then we even have people like James that were later converts, and they were oblivious to Jesus. They didn't even know mean, basically anything about his historical figure at all. And we can see their conversions, dramatic conversions. And then we even have Jewish texts like the Talmud that are hostile sources to Jesus, and they mention him. They call him a magician and stuff like that. But they do confirm the historical details of the Gospels and confirming Jesus' existence. And this is why Bart Ehrman says that the majority, if not all, the consensus, the consensus of all scholars is that he existed. And I would like to actually provide a few quotes, and this is for people just to think about and chew on. So this is what Bart Ehrman himself says: Jesus existed, and those vocal persons who deny it do not so because they have considered the evidence with the dispassionate eye of the historian, but because they have some other agenda than this denial serves. So that's one quote. I'll give another one. This is from atheist historian Michael Grant. In recent years, no serious scholar has ventured to postulate the non-historicity of Jesus. I'll give one last one. So this is Bruce Metzger, and he's actually the teacher of Bart Ehrman. And he goes, quote, "Today, no competent scholar denies the historicity of Jesus." So I'm thinking you have to go out of your way into what Bart Ehrman calls fringe scholarship and to deny the historicity of Jesus. So I'll end it there and see if you guys want to reply to that.
All right, I will just point out, I believe it was the Lavender Lady pointed it out in the chat as well. Berman was speaking to the historical Jesus, not the biblical one. Tomato right now. Good introduction. We'll let this one guy. What do you got?
Well, it's sad to hear that praise out of all that really didn't quote any of the Bible at all, and it's really sad to hear that. I mean, he went off the basis of a man. The Bible says that we should go off the Spirit of God alone and not trust in men. And so to use another scholarly search is it just seems, why use the work of another man when you have the Spirit of God from the Bible to guide you? And as it comes from the historical standpoint of Jesus, whether he was an actual person, as far as I can tell, since I wasn't born around that era of time, I have to say I don't know. And that's an honest answer, because I do not know if Jesus in the flesh existed. In the spirit existed, yes. He did exist, and he does exist, and he will come in the flesh. When will he come in the flesh? At the end of Revelation. Why at the end of Revelation? It's because everything points to Revelation coming at the end, when everything gets fulfilled. All promises do get fulfilled at the end. And so I would like to pull some verses out that explains the spirit of Jesus in the Bible, if you guys will allow me. I know this might be a little confusing the way I explain it, but I'll try to do it the best way I can.
Oh yeah, do your Christian thing, man.
Yeah, thank you. Exodus 16:7-10. It goes from, "And in the morning ye shall see the glory of the God." I'm reading from the Geneva book, not the King James or the New Testament. The Geneva is a little bit older than the King James.
You're going to trigger Guzman in the chat.
That's fine. Anyway, going back to the verses. "And in the morning ye shall see the glory of the Lord, for he hath heard your grudgings against the Lord. And what are we that have murmured against us?" Sorry, it's that tongue twister. "And again Moses said, at the evening shall the Lord give you flesh to eat, and in the morning fill your bread. For the Lord hath heard your mumblings which ye mumber against him. For what are we? Your mumberings are not against us, but against the Lord." So in this instance, they're clearly complaining to Moses and Aaron at the priesthood that what's going on. And he's like, your quarrel, you're asking us, but your quarrel isn't with us, it's with the Lord. And I'd like to mention in verse 7 how it says, "Ye shall see the glory of the Lord." And I take that to be the spirit of Jesus, at least the angel, the messenger of God. That's given authority and power. Again, he says, your mumblings are not against us, but against the Lord. And to continue on from verse 9, "And Moses said unto Aaron, say unto all the congregation of the children of Israel, draw near before the Lord, for he hath heard your murmurings. Oh, I hate that. And now Aaron spake unto the whole congregation of the children of Israel. They looked toward the wilderness, and behold, the glory of the Lord appeared in the cloud. Now, I don't know if you guys get those biblical references there, but who comes in the cloud and who comes from the wilderness? The Spirit of Christ. And the Spirit of Christ is coming into kind of in Moses. Let me explain here how the Spirit of Christ came into Moses. Exodus 24:15-18. Then Moses went up to the mount, and the cloud covered the mountain, and the glory of the Lord abode up on Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it 6 days, and the seventh day he called unto Moses out of the midst of the cloud. Kind of like the same thing as in heaven when in Revelations when a voice calls out from the midst of the throne of God, and all the angels are there. Anyway, and the sight of the glory of the Lord was like a consuming fire on top of the mountain in the eyes of the children of Israel. And Moses entered into the midst of the cloud and went up to the mountain, and Moses was in the mount 40 days and 40 nights. So now we have Moses going up into the cloud, so to speak, like going up into the heaven, and then for 40 days and 40 nights. So we can see the correlation there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just usually fall asleep when people read the Bible.
That's fine.
Go ahead, man. I'm messing with you.
Exodus 33:17-23. And the Lord said unto Moses, I would do this also that, I really don't know if I really should go into the verses, but it talks about seeing the face of the Lord. And see, because it's a lot of verses. It really is a lot of verses. And you're right. I should give you just the meat, not the milk along with the meat. I should just really give you the meat. So there's this other claim that no one has ever seen the face of the Lord, right? If you consider the face of the Lord, meaning Panuel, the face of God, the actual angel that represents God, and no one has ever seen it. And if you give it the context when Moses saw it, and along with Abraham, it was this angel that the Lord sent. And so
The first humans saw him, right?
No, it was the voice of the Lord. It's always mentioned. And the angel of the Lord came down.
God was literally walking through the Garden of Eden.
It
talks about how God felt the wind upon his face.
As I asked earlier, if I could just continue, and then at the end.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's fine, because otherwise I'll lose my train of thought, and then it's all for naught.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Furthermore, thou cannot see my face, for no man shall see me and live. And that's what it says. And then also the Lord said, behold, there is a place by me that thou shalt stand upon the rock. And while my glory passeth by, I will put thee in a cleft in the rock, and I will cover thee with my hand, and while I pass by. After I take away my hand, thou shalt see my back part, but my face thou shalt not see. Which is, I believe this is a reference to the Passover in Egypt, but it seems odd that they're speaking of that, because they're talking about them being in the clefts, and there's other non-canonical sources that speak with the cleft that I'm not going to mention or bring up, but what's the book called? The Book of Hermas, I believe, speaks more along the clefts and the rocks. It's a very interesting. It's another revelation on parallel with Revelations. The actual revelation, I should say. Revelation. It's like Revelations. It's another type of apocryphal revelation. So then, like I said, I don't think the Spirit of God exists, and He hasn't come yet. And everything in the New Testament is just prophetic. The same way in the Old Testament seems to be prophetic in the same instant. And we'll go to 2 Peter for this. And I'm just going to read the stuff that I have highlighted, just because. Dearly beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that that one day of the Lord is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. So if the Lord is coming down and He's chilling with us in the flesh, that means He's going to have to be, when He's going to come down, it's going to be for 1,000 years. So unless the 1,000 years has already been up, or the timeline's just messed up, it's been past 1,000 years in the millennium reign. He should have already had His kingdom come. So obviously that hasn't happened. But people will say, hey, He's just waiting for everyone to come to Christ. He's just waiting for everyone to come to Christ. Well, what if He hasn't come yet? And that's why no one's going to come to Christ. And when He comes and He resurrects everyone along with Himself, then everyone will know He's the one true God. But let me go back to what I was saying. The Lord of the promises is not slack as some count slackness, but is patient towards us, and would have no man to perish, but all men to come to repentance. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, which is the heaven shall pass away, and and the noise and elements and all that. We all kind of know this. And this is an interesting bit. But we look for new heavens and a new earth, according to his promise, wherein dwelleth righteousness. And I'm going to skip on a little bit. Ye therefore, beloved, seeing ye know these things before, beware lest you be plucked away with the error of wickedness, and fall for your own steadfastness. But grow in grace and the knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be glory both now and forevermore. And then I'll go to back up my case that no one has seen Christ, to 1 Timothy 6:14-16. Thou keepest this commandment without spot and unrebukable until the appearing of our Lord Jesus Christ, which in due time he shall show. That is, bless and Prince only, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now that's interesting to call him the Prince of, the Prince only, the King of Kings, which means he hasn't been crowned king yet. So which means
this a sermon? You've been going on
yeah,
like a sermon.
dude, you've been going on for quite a long time.
Come on, man. How
Did you just come on here to come on an atheist
existed or
channel to
not?
preach some shit?
First, you say he existed. Did he exist or not? A or B, brother? Come on.
I said
Did he exist?
spiritually. No, I said spiritually, not physically. There's a
No,
difference.
okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting. Like, you kind of like you don't think this Jesus existed yet. That's what I'm getting from that.
Right.
That he is to come. And people say return, but it's thy kingdom come.
So
Thy
go
will
on
be
and
done.
rail
Yeah.
about Revelations
Yeah.
again. See, that's what I'm talking about. What
Yeah,
the topic?
Go ahead, Chris. Let's let Chris go. That was a little hard to follow.
I'm not completely done
No,
yet.
you're
There's
not
more
done
to
yet.
it.
Continue railing.
Please,
Yeah,
yes.
Please
yeah,
stay
but
near
please
the topic,
hurry it
at
up,
least
'cause
on
we're
the
losing
same
viewers.
block, perhaps, as the topic. Carry on with your random scriptures.
That's fine. And it says, who only hath immortality and dwelleth in the light that no man can attain to, who never man saw, neither can see, nor will be honor and power everlasting. Amen. So again, when you interrupt me, I was just going to say that this is 1 Timothy, so it's talking about Christ, and no man has ever saw, neither can see. So how's it talking about that with Christ if if he's already passed and had a resurrection?
Didn't somebody stick their finger through his hand? Didn't the Bible say somebody stick their finger through his hand? I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt your rant, but I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, it said that, but then again,
Many
it's
people
to say right here that he's not being seen. But again,
I will give you this one guy, and we'll let Chris go before I put my thoughts in. A lot of we have direct evidence that some of the earliest Christians thought that Jesus was celestial and not physical. So I would think that your interpretation fits with maybe some of the earliest versions of Christianity that we know of. So I'll give you that. But it was kind of hard. It's if you're going to try to prove the biblical Jesus, you might need to use sources outside of the Bible. But we'll go ahead and let Chris go.
Well, I just because again, I didn't realize what was going on. I thought, my bad, guys. So I'm just going to throw up a few kind of points I want to make. Am I incorrect or correct in that Paul never met Jesus physically?
You are correct.
Incorrect?
yep.
Okay, so Father Paul either dreamt or hallucinated Jesus. Everything about Jesus, Paul did that. Okay, so let's just go there. Second of all, I think it's interesting.
Disagree with that, though. I don't align with that. I would say in 1 Corinthians 15, William Lane Craig, you can check. He has a whole article on this. The Greek, the syntax of the Greek, how it's used, is shown a physical. He had a physical experience with Jesus. So I mean, I know
who had a physical experience with Jesus.
Paul.
Oh, I
Okay.
love that you're bringing up 1 Corinthians 15. Paul also says that Jesus gave up all of his powers and became a slave to the universe, the lowest of beings. I love that verse.
Okay. Well, I just want to throw out my few points that I got, and then all right. So we've got first century non-believers who met Christians such as Tacitus and Josephus. And even despite the controversy over whether they were real or whether it was just added later or whatever, we'll just right now for fun, just give it to them and say that they really wrote that. Two guys who were non-believers met first century Christians and wrote about it and yet weren't convinced. did not become Christians. Isn't that strange? First century, I mean, some people today actually hold their beliefs partially based on the fact that these first century non-believers wrote about Jesus. And yet they wrote about him, but they weren't convinced. I just want to throw that out there. Also, I want to mention that there are these interesting little efforts I see of Christians doing what they can to shoehorn Jesus into the Old Testament. Jesus is the cloud now. Jesus is the cloud. Is that right? Okay, so I've seen another video, all these begats. The begats is just a wasted space in the Old Testament. Begat. You could have told us to boil our water. You hear me rail about that on the regular. And yet Christians want to go that actually the begats are secretly the names of these persons in ancient Hebrew when translated means a secret message code. Jesus is the Son of God and he's coming. And this is, Old Testament. But you know, when you read that, it's actually more like nonsense. Pardon me, my turn.
Yeah,
my mic was on, yeah.
Okay, it reads more like nonsense, you know.
I said, never mind.
And then you have to ask yourself: did these people really name their kids things that would have essentially meant, "Hey, they're great sickness. Hey, they're darkness in man. Darkness in man. Go tell third nipple that left eye." You know, did they really name their children this? No, it's just shoehorning, trying to shoehorn Jesus in there anywhere where it says. Because one time they referred to Jesus as this, then anywhere in the Bible where it's convenient for you, Jesus can mean that. So one time they called Jesus the light, so now Jesus is the light everywhere that it's convenient for you in your story in the Old Testament in order to prove that Jesus is your guy. Okay, and now that Jesus is the cloud, Jesus is the Lord's voice. Why didn't it just say Jesus? Why didn't he come out and say, "Hey, my name is Jesus. I will be born 1,000 years from now. You should write about my ass now"? Why? And yet it didn't. It's just a voice off in the cloud. But no, we're going to go ahead and shoehorn Jesus in there. That's what you can do. If the New Horn is now this is actually, I get what you're saying about this. If the New Testament is prophetic, then Jesus didn't live in the flesh. I get that. But again, there's so many things in the Bible where Jesus said they touched him. They did these things. His own followers did X, Y, and Z. Therefore, if you're going to use the Bible as your source, then you've got like 500 references of where people actually said they physically saw and or met Jesus. And like one offhanded reference, when you read it standing on your left foot in the ancient Hebrew, covering your eye, it means this. And you're going to go, "Oh, they didn't mean Jesus." That's kind of weak, brother. That's weak even for me, dude. So, and then finally, I want to point out there are a ton of contradictions in the Bible. Was Jesus born and go south into Egypt, or was Jesus born and go north? Did Jesus do this or did Jesus do that? Have you guys read the New Testament? It's full of contradictions. If you're gonna base your arguments, now you do sound smart about it, but I mean, when you're basing your arguments on text that is absolutely contradictory, and it's like Stan Lee wrote Spider-Man, and Stan Lee says Spider-Man is real, therefore Stan Lee must be real. But Spider-Man wasn't really written by Stan Lee, was it? Spider-Man was written by a whole bunch of different people 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. You know, I mean, is there any credulity? Do you actually stop at any point and go, you know, this does kind of sound a little stupid? Okay, so I have said my rant. I would actually, technically, if you want to go there, I would agree with, pardon me, this one guy. Jesus probably didn't physically exist.
Yeah,
So
I'm
my
actually
rant is
surprised
over.
by that because I thought that you would.
You
would be.
If I may,
He
may
would
I
be
continue
more.
just a moment?
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me base this in this. Okay. I'm actually quite ambivalent on the topic. It doesn't matter whether he physically existed or didn't exist. I still don't think he had power even. So let me change my vote. I watched Richard Carrier and I went, that's pretty convincing. I even talked to Richard Carrier on my show and I told him personally, you can go back and watch my stream. I told him, you know, I've seen your thing and you kind of have me convinced Jesus wasn't real. But I haven't seen the contrary evidence. I have not gone and seen Bart Ehrman. So maybe he was real. But even if he was real, that doesn't mean that he had power. I mean, how many different crowns of thorns do they have in the church over there that Jesus personally wore? There's like 6 of them. There's 6 of them. And these are relics that people see power in. You guys don't see nothing wrong with that? There's no...
Besides the idolatry?
I'm sorry.
Could I respond to
said
some of these?
beside the idolatry?
I'd like to respond to some of this if I could.
yeah.
Tom.
Yeah, I'll let you respond before I go, Praise. But what are you saying? This one guy.
The only thing I wanted to say is that about like the physical touching thing. If it's all prophetic, it hasn't happened yet, so it has to happen for him to be touched. It would be a prophetic, so it can't happen if it happens. Just saying.
Okay, I
If
understand.
it's prophetic, it hasn't happened yet, so it will happen in the given context. If you look at it as a prophetic
All right.
message, it's something that is to come.
So what?
Just
So
saying.
he hasn't been crucified yet. He'll be crucified when he comes back and rules for 1,000 years.
Essentially, yeah, that's what it's given, right? Because a day with God is like 1,000 years, and that makes more sense.
That doesn't make any sense, dude.
I don't know.
But I'm gonna
Yeah,
let Praise.
I
I'm gonna let
agree. I
Praise
don't-
respond.
yeah.
Go ahead, Praise.
So, Chris was talking about, well, why didn't some of these people, convert to Christianity? Well, no, we have a whole empire
Is it time to go?
that converted to Christianity.
No, not yet.
No,
The
I'm,
whole
I'm
No,
era.
we're talking about the earliest writings,
No.
brother. You weren't listening. The earliest
No,
writings.
no, I
Who
know,
is the
but I'm-
earliest writings? No. Answer the question. Who was the
Nakatsuchi,
earliest writings?
Tim-
They literally met first century
Tim,
Christians and
real
did
quick.
not convert.
I'm sorry. What's going on this one, guy? People are trying to talk. What's up?
no, I'm sorry. I have to get going. My
All right.
mother-in-law's here for work, so I apologize, guys. It was great talking with a little time I had, but I gotta get going.
All right. Thank
All
you,
right,
this one guy. Wish you could stay longer. We'll talk about this more
Sorry.
later.
It was fun. Like I said, oh man.
You have a different take. But we'll yeah. Go ahead and get out of here, and we'll let Praise and Chris
All right.
have their back and forth, and then I'm gonna jump in here.
May I give one final word?
If it's really, really fast.
And related.
Where is it? Oh, never mind. I can't find it. But I'll talk to you guys later.
I'll try to bring you on, and we'll talk
That's
about
cool.
your
I'm a
interpretation
bad
of
man.
this one guy.
All right, bye-bye.
Mother-in-laws. That's universal. Everybody mother-in-laws.
Yeah,
I totally
yeah,
feel
I've
his
never
pain.
had one, and I'm glad.
Yes, yeah. And this is why I don't debate, because I'm not good at it. I get debate. I get passionate. I'm not good at it.
Well, I
apologize.
think you're doing great, Chris, and you made really good points.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
but I tend to be rude, and I'm sorry. So
Oh no,
Praise, carry on.
Yeah. I might disagree. I think that some people have philosophical biases, and they don't want to accept the things that maybe the evidence they've been shown. And we even have accounts in the New Testament where people saw the miracles of Jesus and they didn't believe. They didn't want to believe. So I'm thinking there's an underlying bias, and I think this is expressed by the quote by Van Dalen. He's actually a scholar. And he says it's extremely difficult to object to the empty tomb on historical grounds. Those who deny it do so on the basis of theological or philosophical assumptions. So I'm saying there is biases out there that people that keep them from coming to accepting or converting to Christianity.
Well, I think Chris's point, where those two specific scholars that Christians tend to go to so much, they heard all these stories about Jesus and they didn't convert. And then you also have Paul himself, who originally persecuted Christians, and during that process would have heard thousands upon thousands of testimonies from Christians, never became a believer until he had a hallucination. So I mean, there's issues there.
yeah, neurosyphilis we call it nowadays. Anyway, let me ask you though. What Praise said was indeed had some weight about the empty tomb. You did mention the empty tomb. That's a powerful thing.
Right.
Now, tell me how many different versions of the empty tomb story are there in the various chapters of the New Testament? How in one of them Mary meets it, in the other one an angel is there, and another one two men meet it. I mean, there are no two stories are alike in the New
Right.
Testament. Am I correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
And-
I just wanted to confirm that before we
Sure.
went further. Carry on.
Yeah, and J. Warner Wallace put a whole book out on this, The Tisa Detective, and he was actually an atheist before he came to Christianity, and he was reviewing the gospel accounts, and he was saying, wow, these are authentic because they have different, the eyewitness type of, they have that part of it it's legitimate, so it's not colluded. If something was fishy about the gospels, they would all align to be perfectly matching, and they would have all this stuff that matches up, and that, and according to J. Warner Wallace, that shows that it would be colluded. So I think the difference of the gospels actually lend credence to its authenticity.
All right, so I'm going to jump in
So it
and
really
put in
doesn't
my
matter
thoughts.
what happened. If it was, if all the stories were alike, then you would believe it. because
Mhm.
they're all alike. If they weren't alike, then you're not going to believe it, because that shows, I mean, you just described your own prejudice about the first century writers. Some people are going to believe or not believe no matter what. You're going to believe no matter what.
Yeah, and
Not
the,
necessarily, no.
So
I would say
yeah, I mean,
40-50.
but when
The
the story
empty
does
tomb
match up, wait,
perfectly
pardon me. When the
plotted
story
out.
does match up, the Old Testament says something that you want to. Okay, I'm sorry.
no,
Sorry,
no,
Nick.
I'll
It's
let
your
you.
show,
I'll
brother.
let you respond, Praise. But I have like not even done my opening yet. So.
Praise,
Oh,
I'm
yeah, go
sorry,
ahead, your
dude.
opening,
I'm going to
Doc.
engage my mute.
Go ahead, Dark. I'm good.
Well, so you have to take into account what was going on in the area when these things were transpiring. In the Mediterranean at this time, Hellenism was the predominant religion. So you had Alexander the Great spreading that. He did what he did. His generals carried on after he died. And Hellenism was the major religion in the Mediterranean region at that time. And what happened a lot was that as these societies were being conquered, that they had this broad shell of Hellenism, and then they would fit the religions of these that were in these areas that were being conquered into that Hellenism. So they would take what was there, they would fit it into Hellenism, and then it would change. And we have several examples of this: the Osiris and Isis cult in Egypt, the Adonis cult in Syria. The Thracians had the Zalmaxis cult. So, I mean, we have plenty of examples of this. And Christianity itself, let us not forget, and I know you would deeply disagree with this, but it's true, is polytheistic. You don't just have one God. And I could just go with the Trinity, but I'm not even going to do that, because the angels are immortal. The angels are invested with God-like powers. And Genesis chapter 6 actually calls the angels sons of God. You also have Satan, which would be your evil god, who is immortal, invested with godlike powers. You would have demons, which would be demigods. So all of this fits into that perspective of an area being conquered and fitting into this overall religion. But then what else do we have? Because we know that the earliest gospel was written by Mark. At the earliest, I think it's around 76 AD. He talks about the destruction of the temple. The destruction of the temple didn't take place till 73 AD, I believe. And what? So when you have the Gospels written so much longer after Jesus died, and we know that there was the siege of Jerusalem in the 60s. Jerusalem was completely burnt to the ground. All of its records were destroyed. What you do is you create a vacuum to where you can make a myth, and there's no way to substantiate it because there are no records. You have to remember, these Gospels, as you said yourself, weren't written right at first. There were oral histories first. And as I mentioned, we have direct proof that some of those oral histories talk about Jesus being a celestial body, not somebody that actually existed. So you have to take all of that into context when you're talking about the beginning of this religion. Not to mention, it started as a Jewish sect and didn't become something more until Paul came along. Now, Paul wrote his letters in the 50s, 50 ADs, around that area. So about 25 years before the first gospel would have been written. Paul never mentions the empty tomb. Paul never mentions miracles. And that should be a huge indicator that these stories have changed numerous times over the years. That's my opening.
Okay, so if you want, I can respond to some of that too. And also, I had some other responses with Chris too I'd like to address.
Yeah, start with that, brother. I'll be quiet, I promise.
Oh no, yeah, this is good. This is good discussion. Well, number one, the celestial Jesus thing, I think, is a misunderstanding, misconceptions of the text. Even Hebrews 2.
No, this was before there was any text. We're talking earliest Christians, a very Jewish sect.
Gnostics, the Gnostic teachings of Christ. Well, I mean, no one really puts any advocacy for these Gnostic beliefs, and they really are shunned through scholarship. I wouldn't put any credence into those.
If I may,
Sure.
real quick, before we get rolling, I just want to ask a question of Knock, really, because I didn't know this. Paul wrote that 50 AD, almost 20 years after the death of Jesus. Paul wrote that? Okay.
Yeah, I believe it was in the 50s, from what I saw. And a lot of Paul's letters have pretty much been proven to be forged, not written by Paul. A lot of them were written by Paul. It also appears that a lot were added to it after Paul wrote them. So even the things that we attribute to Paul were completely by Paul himself.
Yeah, and those are debatable in scholar. It's a continuing debate with Paul stuff, and it's definitely not a settled issue. But also, I want to address what you said about these gods of Satan are immortal. No, and this is even covered by Michael Heiser extensively in the Unseen Realm. In Psalms 90, I think it's Psalms 92 or one of those. It's in the Psalms 80s or 90s. He calls the Elohim mortal. So that means all Elohim are mortal outside the one Elohim, which is the Father. So I would say no, that's not the case. And Michael Heiser has already addressed this.
So you're saying that angels are mortal?
Yes.
So in Zechariah 6, where it talks about an archangel that has come, that has all of the attributes of Jesus, and that you're saying that angel was mortal.
Yeah.
Do you know? Do you know what the Jews called that archangel? Because they have a name for that archangel in their angelology.
It's probably like Michael or one of those.
Jesus. Like his name was Jesus.
So okay, so they're saying
so what Christians are doing is, and they're saying that was actual a prophecy. I'm surprised you didn't pick up on this. So this was supposed to be the prophecy that prophesied Jesus. What Paul did was take something that was already written, stole from it, and fulfilled that prophecy by inventing this character.
No, we see the characteristics of of the authenticity of a Jewish Jesus, and he talks of he even mentions Isaiah 50.
Does Satan die?
Does Satan die? Yeah.
When?
At the Great White Throne of Judgment, Revelation.
So, but he's killed though. He doesn't die from natural shit, right?
No, yeah, he's destroyed. Yeah.
So wouldn't he be immortal then, if he's not dying from natural causes?
He has immortality, but that doesn't mean he is immortal.
That's godlike attributes. So are you going to say that that being immortal isn't being a god?
No.
Even God defines that in Genesis. He says that's why he kicked Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, so they couldn't eat from the tree of life, so they couldn't become immortal and be gods like him. That's in your own Bible.
Become like the Elohim, right? Which are the angels.
No, it doesn't say Elohim. It says become like him, not the Elohim.
I thought it said become like us. Technically, was what I thought.
Right.
Maybe.
Because he's talking about somebody else.
But even that would go towards my point, because that would be God equating the angels, which again in Genesis chapter 6 are called the sons of God, to being like him, like he is godlike.
And if God is the only one who has eternal life, then why even bother having a tree?
Well, no, it's...
And I really didn't mean for you to be ganged up here. I was hoping to have two Christians praise.
Yeah, that's true. That's good.
No,
I'm going to have to bail at the hour, so, and I really will try to be quiet. You actually had points against the points that I had made earlier. I'd care to hear them.
I spoke it, and, maybe there is a God, because look who's here.
Hey, King
Sky.
What's up, man? How y'all doing?
What's up, Sky? You're on time. You're not too late, man.
What's up, man? Yeah, I had to work a little bit. I work in security and everything at this bank, so I just got back home. Had to quickly take a shower and get dressed and everything. How y'all doing?
Doing good.
Pretty good. I'll be right back. I'm just going to change my avatar real quick.
All right,
man. Yeah, I'll quickly address Chris. One of these points he was saying, with the Spider-Man account, but I would say that this is a false equivalence because they're two different literary genres, and I think that's unfair to compare those two.
Wait. So you're saying that because they're two different literary genres, that the authors of the Bible somehow, because they say it's true, it's true?
No.
How is there a difference?
I'm saying comparing them, but trying to make it mythology. I was actually using the opposite. Just because Spider-Man mentions stuff that might be true, that makes it a myth. That makes the Bible a mythology. I was just trying to respond to making the Bible a mythology.
I got that. Well, I mean, that's all. We're talking about using the Bible to prove itself.
Yeah.
It's bad, but not the way to go. That's all I was talking about at the time. That whenever I used the reference of Stan Lee in the Bible, that's how I was talking about it.
Right. I wouldn't use it. I don't ever go like the Bible says something, therefore it's true. This is even pissed off talk that I was even going to historians and outside sources. So.
Right. Well, the last person who was here seemed to be he based his entire argument on the Bible, despite. I mean,
yeah, that was kind of weird. But I mean, he's a bit of a different Christian. I've known him for a long time. He's a good guy, but yeah, that was a bit weird.
There we go. I'm doing the cam too, because
nice.
Now I'm gonna let my hair down.
Probably the same reasons. But Sky Out. So in praise, I'll let you go back on because I know you probably have some questions. But just real quick, Sky Out, give us why you think Jesus existed, and try to make it less than 20 minutes.
Oh, well, there's a lot of historical evidence for Jesus Christ existing, such as what I use as non-Christian sources, so that way we can have a good balance. First, there's the conclusion that Jesus Christ existed historically was from the non-Christian sources, such as the Roman historians and the Jewish historians. Both Josephus and Lucian indicated that Jesus was regarded as a historical figure, and because we have historical other people from non-Christian sources such as Nero, who persecuted the Christians after he was resurrected and ascended into heaven, and there's also other non-Christian sources for the fact that Jesus Christ existed historically, such as the Plenty of Younger and the Talmud. Basically indicate that he existed historically, and there's also the Lucian, which implied that he was a very revered teacher and that Jesus Christ existed historically. Now, third, both Josephus, again, these are non-Christian sources, so they're not biased in any way, and you can certainly look these up. Josephus and the Talmud indicated that he did perform miracles like the wedding at Cana. And the fourth one they have to prove that Jesus existed historically was from Tacitus from Rome. The Roman historians, such as Lucian, Talmud, and Josephus, that all concluded that he was crucified, and Nero persecuted the Christians and blamed the Christians for setting the city on fire during that time in Jerusalem. So if you look at the data from Tacitus, from Josephus, that occurred, also the historical information of Jesus Christ concerning Pontius Pilate, because Pontius Pilate was definitely a historical figure that met Jesus Christ, and we all know he existed. So basically, when we boil it down to these 5 conclusions that are non-Christian sources, so that way we're not using the Bible as a source, we're using non-Christian sources for historical evidence. These references conclude that Jesus' resurrection from both Tacitus and Josephus and Plenty of Younger were not Christians. They actually hated Christ and they didn't believe in him.
I don't think that they hated him. They didn't believe in him.
They didn't believe in him. But
you missed that part of the conversation. We already covered that. But
yeah, we have covered this. So you're basically giving, Josephus, he went and talked to a bunch of Christians. He wrote down what they said, so it makes it true.
I'm sorry, if I may. Thank you, Knock. Just real quick, I just want to kind of point out a couple of things. Tacitus was born, allegedly, 23 years after Jesus died. Josephus was born in 93 AD, 60 years after Jesus dies. There's not a single contemporary accounting of Jesus. All you're talking about are people who... Now, we're talking about generations of people. This is people who met people who met people who told people about Jesus.
Wow.
And
yeah, if you look at the actual scholars, the vast majority of scholars like Bruce Messenger,
Bruce Messenger isn't going to change the date in which Josephus and Tacitus were born.
I'm not talking that. That's not the point of the question. The point of the question.
You're using them as evidence in your argument. Of
course,
I'm using go ahead.
Non-Christian sources as evidence. I can use Plenty of Younger. We don't have to, if you don't like Tacitus or.
Do you want me to look him up? See what year he was born?
It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
Carry on.
Well,
And
it is an important point, Skyalt, because for one, we're talking about pretty much a full lifespan in this time after Jesus died. We're talking about 20 to at least 20 years after
Yes.
Paul wrote his letters, before these gospels were formulated. So that is a valid point. And the reason we don't have any documentation, as I pointed out in my opening, was because in 70 AD, around that time, Jerusalem was burnt to the ground. All of the records was burned to the ground. So that created a vacuum for a myth like this to be born,
Right.
to where there could be no evidence against it.
Right, and after about 20 years after Josephus, there's still the Romans and the brother of Jesus also.
Now wait a second. 20 years after Josephus was born long after Jesus was dead. So any Romans who wrote things about Jesus after Josephus certainly couldn't have had firsthand experience.
Well, yeah, but you do know that Pilate's, we have 0 records of Pilate all the way to almost a century afterward.
That's a good
way
point. Well,
after.
do we have evidence from Pontius Pilate? You mentioned Pontius Pilate, and I believe he was there. I'm you know me. Well, you don't know me. I'm sorry, King Scout. I'm kind of neutral in all this. I don't know whether he existed or not, but
right,
you know,
right.
Well, I would like to real quick. Actually, I'm not going to cut you off, Scott. I'll let you respond.
I was going to say, you'd have to show instead of arguing against my evidence, you'd have to demonstrate how he didn't exist instead of trying to refute the.
But you haven't put forth any evidence yet.
Yeah, I gave you historians, and you're
No,
just
you
saying.
didn't.
Well,
None of them were contemporary to Jesus. All of them were born. Jesus was dead 30 plus years after every one of them. Even Pliny the Younger was born 40 years after Jesus was
even
born.
Paul didn't have a firsthand eyewitness account. He based everything off of Revelation.
But that is a fallacy, though. You guys know that's fallacious reasoning, right? That's presentism.
Well, I'm sorry.
A presentism fallacy.
Explain that to me.
Sure. Yeah. So what you're doing is you're applying modern standards and applying it to anachronistic fallacy.
So explain to me how Josephus being born. Let me look at these dates again. Tacitus was born in 56 AD and Josephus was born in 93 AD. Explain how I'm applying any kind of fallacy to that. That's just math, brother. 30 that's 60 years after Jesus was dead. 60 years after the death of Jesus, before Josephus was even born. So you don't think the Christians elevated Jesus? They didn't, the Christians who talked to Josephus did not meet Christ.
Well, yeah, that's what I was about to point that out, Chris. Most scholars will tell you, like, maybe it's possible that a few witnesses were left alive, but they had much shorter lifespans back then. Almost all of those eyewitnesses would have been dead by the time Josephus was born.
Yeah,
and Bart Ehrman has addressed this stuff, and a lot of them were destroyed because they were used through oral traditions, and they got overused, and they might have been destroyed through Romans, their opposition. So I'm saying this is a presentist fallacy, and I'll even read it off to you guys. This is an uncritical adherence to present-day attitudes, especially the tendency to interpret past events in terms of modern values and concepts. So I'm thinking you're
so what modern values and concepts are we talking about? Chris is merely giving you the dates that they were born.
So we have TVs, we have social.
That doesn't affect the year, brother.
Nobody's said anything about that.
I mean, you can obfuscate all you want, but this is you're not changing the fact that we're talking about years per annums. Now there have been times in the calendar where we've changed things in the calendar. We've changed from this to change to that. We know about that, but we're talking about these historians who are using these people who were born decades after Jesus allegedly died. Decades.
Right, but we're talking about 2,000 years ago. They didn't have newspapers. They didn't have all this
That makes
stuff.
it even worse. So you're more likely to believe the fact that it was true. It's like have you ever heard of the telephone game where you play it in school? Where one
we have
person tells a
thousands
story?
of manuscripts that they're just
And they're
not what
very
you call
contradictory.
contemporary.
Yes, they're very contradictory. We've already covered the talks about the
they're
Gospels. They're not contradictory. Oh, don't even
I
go
would-
there, brother. I can pull up the internet.
All right.
I would
So
love to hear some of these contradictions.
But we are. So where did Jesus go after he was born? after he was born.
We can talk about
Well,
Acts.
how many people were in the tomb? How many people did Mary meet Jesus after the tomb? Was it a Roman guard? Just go look those two things up. If you're going to base your beliefs on the continuity of the Bible, that's going to be a hard.
Yeah, we have Paul's letters that Paul
secret
clearly
of the
tells you that
narrative.
he was converted outside of Judea. He
The
goes in.
chronology, the narrative, that is, it's just there's.
Let me finish. Let me finish. You asked for contradictions. I'm giving you some. We have Paul's letters who said that he was born outside of Judea. We also know from Paul's letters that he preached the gospel in Arabia for 3 years before ever returning to Jerusalem. Now you go to Acts and Luke says Paul was in Jerusalem the whole time. That's a contradiction.
Which kind of doesn't matter because
Let me
Paul never
respond to
really
that.
met Jesus anyway, right? So it doesn't matter
exactly.
what Paul wrote. Paul could have wrote anything. He could have, you know what? The fact that we're believing what Paul wrote at all, of course, which leads us to non-Christian scholars. The only non-Christian scholars we have are who? Tacitus,
And Josephus.
and even
Pliny.
the works of
You got
Tacitus
Pliny.
and Pliny the Younger, and that's wonderful. Pliny the Younger is actually the least. Let's see, 61. No, see, I was thinking Pliny the Younger was the closest. That's not true. Pliny the Younger
Yeah.
was born in 61 A.D.
Pretty much Paul would have
5
been the
years
closest.
after Tacitus was born.
See, I think
Right.
Paul was actually alive during the time of Jesus. He was just killing Christians.
Right, but how many historical figures have contemporary sources, though? I mean, you got to apply it equally
many-
or fairly.
How many
Right.
Christians were there? Wait. If Paul was killing Christians during the lifetime of Jesus,
No.
how many Christians did Jesus? There were no Christians. There was just a small. I mean, how many?
Yeah, I think there was like
Christians were
5,000. It might have been after Jesus died that he
Yeah,
was actually
I mean,
persecuting the
I
Christians.
would say you have a very distorted view on the historical accounts of surrounding the life and death of Jesus Christ, because there's evidence again from if you look at the historian and different scholars, like historian Edward Yamasuchi, who reporting the fact that Nero, he blamed the Christians for the fire that destroyed Rome in AD 64. And
Mhm.
Tacitus, I have exactly
Hey.
what he wrote right here.
There's no reason why Nero couldn't have blamed Christians for that. There is no reason why there could have. There's plenty of Christians. That just proves there was Christians. Period. End of story. End of
So,
story. There's nothing
why-
else
Yeah,
after that.
yeah. It just
Why-
proves that there were Christians in that
That's it.
time period.
Why do you think there are Christians though?
Why are there
Because
Christians now?
Jesus-
Why? Hey, listen. If
Well,
Buddha wasn't right, why are there Buddhists? If
We can
Buddha isn't
talk
right-
about that
because
because
people believe stuff, dude.
well, and Judaism at that time was not monolithic. It was actually
Right.
splintering into several different sects.
So there
And
would
how
be
many
no
different
Christians if it wasn't
people
for
did we
Christ,
have
right?
going around claiming to be prophets? How many different people did we have going around
That-
working miracles and
irrelevant.
doing tricks? I mean,
Can I real
Huh?
quick address the birthplace? I want to address this with the dog. So the only difference is that Luke skipped the part of Egypt and went
no.
straight to the return to Nazareth. Matthew, on the other hand, was writing with the Jews in mind and included the time spent in Egypt.
Exactly.
So you got to understand. This is what I'm saying. These
No.
supposed contradictions are easily.
Hey, all right, then go to the because there's more of them in it. Go to the New Testament and find out about who found the tomb empty. Who reported that? Go figure that out. They're all different. Was it Mary and her? Was it Mary and her
That's good
friend?
knowledge.
Was it a Roman soldier? Was it? Of course, no. I know what'll happen. It'll be like, well, it
No one
was
said
really
there's
Mary.
the same
it was-
chronology, though.
Or one
It was-
one book of the Bible says that Jesus calmed the storms. The other book says that he just sailed across, nothing happened. One book of the Bible says in that very
Sure.
same story that not only did he calm the storms, but he walked on water. These are all contradictions,
That's
all
because
very
they're not
different
created.
stories.
Clearly
And then-
confused.
Have you seen Bible?
This is
there's-
eyewitness.
Oh, eyewitnesses.
Eyewitness
Where-
principle.
Yeah,
Where,
exactly.
where are the eyewitnesses, and who do we trust?
You have eyewitnesses. Okay, let's say someone's seen a murder. Do you think they all are going to have the same account? If you have people
No.
from different areas,
No,
I've seen it.
that's
No.
human nature. That's human
Yeah.
nature. But so your
Exactly.
eyewitness
Well,
accounts,
so-
these
your
people
eyewitness
were all
accounts
there?
actually comes from Luke. Let's talk about that.
Hey,
So-
wait a second. If Matthew was there, then why didn't it say Matthew saw all this stuff happen? It doesn't.
Yeah.
It said Mary and somebody else found the tomb empty. Does it say Matthew was there at all? If it doesn't say Matthew was there, it's like, whenever Jesus went to the Garden of Gethsemane, who wrote that book? When you go back and look, the person who allegedly wrote the book wasn't even there.
Well, yeah, that's a
Are you
great
supposed to
point
say
because
that John saw this or something like that. To me, that's just shit in the goalpost.
when Jesus is doing his last prayer, all of the apostles are asleep 100 yards away, and yet they recount his prayer word for word. How did they do that?
It's just we're talking about contradictions in the Bible and the failures of the Bible. That's what we're talking. I mean, that's suddenly what we're talking about.
Yeah, and it's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the Gospels themselves because I know, Praise, earlier you mentioned that Paul mentions the Gospel authors, and actually he doesn't, because all of the Gospels
he does.
Well, let me finish, because all of the Gospels were originally written in Greek, and they use the word, they're titled as kata, which is with the name following, and in Greek, that is how you designate source, not author. So they're saying not written by Luke, but the source is Luke. So Paul doesn't mention the authors of the Gospels. We don't know who authored the Gospels.
Galatians 1:18 through 19, he mentions them by name. Paul describes his personal meeting in Jerusalem with Peter and James, the brothers of the Lord.
The apostles. The apostles, but I'm talking about the Gospels. The Gospels weren't written by the apostles. The Gospels were written after all those apostles were dead.
Long after they were followers who listened to stories from other followers.
Peter, are you saying Peter's not a gospel author?
No, what I am saying, you are saying that you said that Peter talked about the authors of the Gospels. He didn't, or not Peter.
No,
Paul. Paul talked about the authors of the Gospels. He didn't. He talked about the apostles, the authors of the Gospels. We don't know who wrote them.
Yeah, Peter is a gospel author. He helped write Mark, and this has already been established.
He's a gospel
Peter would have been long dead when Mark was written. Mark was at the very earliest. Mark would have been written in 73 AD. Let me finish. A lot of scholars doesn't think Mark was actually written until maybe as late as 140 AD. So how did Peter help write that? That's scholarship, Praise. That's scholarship. That's all through scholarship. That's not me saying that shit.
Citation. Come on, Knock. You got to get some citation for that.
I know, right?
All right. So because Mark mentions the destruction of the Jewish temple, we know that happened in 73 AD. So at the very earliest, Mark was written after 73 AD.
Well, no, because we have Peter that's been attested inside the gospel. We can even go to even before then, because Peter is part of that gospel.
Well, it's not like Christians aren't known for making things up, right? And just kind of.
Oh, I mean, atheists don't make up anything, right?
Well, you know, actually, you're right. That's a very good point. It doesn't matter. People are people. We're all shit. Sorry. That's a bad comment on my part. I can own it. That's a bad comment on my part. I'm a bad man. Sorry.
But I mean, you have to admit, you're trying to source scholarship here.
And how come
you have to admit that these were not written in the time of Jesus, Praise.
They were.
You yourself talked about oral traditions being handed down before the Gospels were written earlier in the stream.
Well, no, I never said that. I'm saying that's proof that the Gospels were written during that time. I never said that.
No, you literally was talking about oral traditions being passed along before the Gospels were written, which gave more credence to the God story.
Oral traditions are highly trustable situations too. Oral traditions, I mean, especially in the desert, and that's highly. Yeah,
73 was when the war ended, so that would have been when the temple was burnt to the ground. So I mean, and Mark talks about the destruction of the Jewish temple, so we know that Mark was written after 73 AD.
Right.
This is I would like to learn this. I like learning stuff. Again, guys, I didn't actually come prepared for this sort of talk. And
I didn't expect it to be this heated, but it's fun.
That's why I don't debate, guys. I don't mean any disrespect. I just get excited and I believe certain things, and
so do I. I'm loving this.
I don't mean disrespect. It just happens. So that's why I don't normally debate Sky Out. I'm sorry. I did not know this was a debate between atheists and Christians until I showed up for the show. Had I known it, I
kind of messed up with Chris here. I did tell him when I was on his show, but I don't think he missed it. I think he missed it.
I was probably running this show. I've got 5-6 different screens
good
here.
Point, because I have people to talk. Well, Nakasuchi, you missed this. You're stupid. I'm like, do you understand? I'm running a show. I'm trying to see the chat. I'm trying to make sure everything. Like, I'm gonna miss some shit.
So
you do.
You guys realize that the vast majority of scholars completely disagree with you on Jesus existed historically, but we can move on from that.
We can talk about that. We can talk about that because
I'm sorry. Did Praise? Which is your argument? Do you believe he did existed? Then I am with Praise because I don't really have a dog in this fight. There's plenty of evidence for plenty of it. Just because he existed doesn't mean it's true. Doesn't
Right,
mean
so
any
we
of his
got-
teachings is
right.
true. John actually said if all the teachings, if all the miracles of Jesus Christ were written down, there wouldn't be enough paper in all the world or something, books enough in all the world. Oddly enough, nobody wrote it down. Nobody
I
wrote
don't
it down
know-
at all. Wait, nobody
you
wrote
guys
it
know
down
why
for
Bart Ehrman-
decades later. But yeah, John.
Let's talk about scholarship. So there's a lot of field pressure
gotta go.
within academia. I'm sorry, what?
It's the turn of the hour. It is time for me to disappear and turn into a pumpkin and run
Oh,
away.
man, we were
All
gonna-
right. Thanks for showing up,
I
Daily,
know,
Daily
I know.
Atheist. Thanks for being here, man.
For engaging.
I'm sorry, you guys can trounce Nakasuchi because and why not, dude?
I'm about to bash
I'll
both of
watch
them.
just for this because I mean I hate to say this, but I have now switched to your side. There was a real Jesus. It's fine. Because that's fine. Yeah, I'm cool. Well, there's a weird Jesus. I love it. You guys are
Well,
awesome.
in my
Thank you,
position
and I'm
that there,
sorry.
my position isn't that there wasn't a Jesus. My position is that the biblical Jesus didn't exist.
Do you know why Barterman says the biblical Jesus didn't exist? Because he can't test miracles. He says there's no way to test a miracle, and that's why he does not align with the biblical Jesus. I mean, really, just because you can't test a miracle doesn't mean the biblical Jesus didn't exist. That's
That's true.
to me that is.
Yeah, to me, I don't care about the miracles. The miracles are the reasons why I look at that story and I'm like, that's bullshit. But I'm talking about just the overall circumstances that surrounded the inception of this religion. But go ahead, Chris. I know you're trying to get out of here.
I don't want to be rude. You guys were a lot of fun. Whenever I tell people why I don't
Likewise,
debate,
man.
I will send them towards this thing. I'll be like, these guys kicked my ass. I got all out of hand. I was waving.
No,
my
you
arms and-
was fine. Wait, I
No,
can
you were
I
great,
get a lot
man. You
worse than
didn't
you
do
do. But Chris,
Yeah.
next
I
time I
got a
have you
lot
on, it
worse.
will be that one-on-one where because I do want to interview you about your channel. I totally forgot that was what we were supposed to be doing.
No, my bad. It's on me. Weed brain. You guys are wonderful. Crowd chat. You guys are wonderful. Have a great night. I'm off to save the world. You take care. Love you.
Awesome. Yep. Thanks for coming on. So yeah, it's just me against you two now. So I want to talk about your assertions about scholarship, and I agree. Most of academia does agree that historical Jesus existed, maybe not biblical Jesus. And I'm going to give both of y'all that. But there is field pressure within academia. Let me put my microphone a little bit away. There's field pressure within academia to believe in the historical Jesus. And we have, there's reasons for that. Thomas Thompson claimed Abraham and Moses were mythical, and he was an Old Testament scholar, and there was concerted efforts for several years to destroy that man's career. People in the field remember that. So even a lot of people that built their careers upon the historicity of Jesus and have come to a different conclusion aren't willing to put that conclusion out publicly because they're afraid for their careers.
Okay.
Right.
Let me just say one more thing, Praise, and you can continue. I was going to say that even atheist Richard Dawkins concluded that Jesus Christ existed historically, and there's other atheists that conclude that he existed historically.
I have no evidence that would say that there wasn't a rabbi that was traveling around Israel with a different message. I have no evidence. That's not my position. My position is that biblical Jesus didn't exist. Dude didn't walk on water. He didn't turn water into wine. And if there was a rabbi, a real dude walking around, then the story of the Gospels doesn't relay that character. It relays some supernatural, mythicized version of that character.
You'd have to explain why there's Christians in the first place.
No, I don't. I already did. At the time, Judaism wasn't monolithic. There was plenty of sects. You had the Pharisees, you had the Essenes. John the Baptist himself was raised in the Essene community, and then he went on to found the Baptist movement. Judaism was in several different sects, and Christianity didn't start as Christianity. Christianity started as a sect of Judaism.
So who's talking when you read the Bible in the red words? So you don't believe that's Jesus?
That's somebody wrote some red words. It might be Jesus. I
Some
don't
guy?
know.
It's just some guy, huh?
Well, I mean, so answer the question. How did they get those red words in there during his last prayer when everybody was asleep 100 yards away and they couldn't hear him, yet somehow they got those words in there? How did they do that?
Well, no, apologetics has addressed this, and someone think the Spirit could have. We call
The
theonos.
Spirit did it. That's some proof right there.
Theanastos, yeah, the Spirit inspires people what to say. That happens all the time. Even Paul even says the Spirit inspired him too. But here's another thing too: you can't distinguish the biblical Jesus and between the historical Jesus on any type of historical claims or hermeneutical claims. You have to do it on philosophical claims to claim that supernatural things don't exist. But that's your own assumption, though. But as far as the credibility of
that's not based on assumption. That's based on my experience in this reality. Have you ever seen somebody come back to life after 3 days? Has that ever happened? Besides this one time?
That's an argument from ignorance, though.
How? I actually looked this up. I think the longest somebody's went without a heartbeat is like 28 minutes.
Right, but so I'm saying it's still an argument from ignorance. Because something happens once. Well, that's the whole point. It's a miracle because those things only happen once. So
you need to be able to demonstrate that miracles can happen. Then I'm not the one making a claim that these miracles happen. You are. So demonstrate that miracles can happen. That way, I can believe that Jesus can commit miracles, and I can then believe that Jesus can walk on water. And then I want to figure out how he turned water into wine, because that would be cool.
He's God, but you know who Jesus' brother?
Why would God? I thought God didn't like alcohol. Isn't that like a sin?
No, being a drunkard is a sin.
But I mean, if you're turning water into wine, you don't call that being a drunkard? I mean, like you're in the desert, you need water, but no, I'm going to turn this water into some wine. Let's get crunk.
No,
he's not. I mean, it's fermented wine. I'm not going to say that's like full alcohol.
I'm just saying, like, when does it ever say in the Bible that they were drinking water? The only time it mentions water is turning it into wine.
Well, so no, you don't like the well was drinking water. Are you kidding? John 4, then that's just water there.
Is it possible to turn how many fish into how many thousands of fish for 5,000 people? Is that possible? Has that been demonstrated in reality?
Argument from ignorance. That's the whole point. Is because miracles don't happen that much.
And they don't happen ever. They never happen. You have never seen any of that shit happen. Not in reality.
From ignorance talk. That's coming from a bias. That's not a logical argument.
I mean, the bias would be you thinking something can happen when you don't have demonstratable evidence to make that to support that. That would be bias. What I'm saying, if you're going to make a claim that supernatural can exist, you need to demonstrate that. Otherwise, you're doing nothing but saying the Bible says so, so I believe it.
No. What's the parameters for a miracle, though?
I don't know. I mean, turn water into wine. Have a dude come back to life 3 days after he died. I'll believe that.
Who says that's not possible, though? Like, so you need parameters even.
It's not possible. It's not possible. I mean, with all of our innovations of modern science praise, the longest we've done it, like I said, it was like, I think it was 28 minutes, so it's not possible. I mean, it's not after a certain amount of time, your body starts to decompose.
No, you assume it's not possible, but it hasn't been proven, though.
I don't assume. Reality assumes. All right, it's never happened. So you need to demonstrate that it can happen.
The reality doesn't have a mind. It doesn't assume anything. Reality is just a background.
What?
Like the sky, and things like that. That's just reifying reality. But I'm saying, like, if you're going to say, well, a miracle is like breaking the laws of physics. Well, how do you know the laws of physics are physical in the first place?
Or logic.
Huh? I don't know. I don't know where you're trying to go.
So, like, if you're going to violate the laws of physics, this is what atheists would say. Well, we need to demonstrate that Jesus broke the laws of physics. Well, I would come back and say, well, is gravity physical? Can you demonstrate gravity's physical? And you guys can't. Then how do we know?
We're centering a conversation around the supernatural now, and that's not really where I want to go. But I mean, we can stay here all you want, because, like, again, you would have to demonstrate that the supernatural exists and that these things are possible. So far as we know, they've only happened once in history, right? Like, if you only believe in the Jesus narrative, and your only explanation for that would be the fact that Jesus is God. But you both, I am assuming, follow Paul. And as I said in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul clearly tells you that Jesus had given up all of his supernatural powers, had made himself the lowest of the low, and a slave to the universe.
I want to see, what verse is this? I want to look this up.
1 Corinthians 15, yo.
Like
you mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, but I want to find out what verse in 1 Corinthians 15 specifically you're talking about.
Let me just add some of that real
I'll
quick.
go to it.
I was going to say in Philippians 2:5, we have the incarnation of Jesus Christ, of him becoming a man. So he empties himself as God and becomes a man in the person of Jesus Christ.
Oh, wait, no, I got the wrong verse. You got it right. We're talking Philippians 2:5-8.
Yeah, that's the incarnation.
Oh, so
Yeah, I'm sorry. I went back to Corinthians for some reason, but it's Philippians 2:5-8.
Yeah, I'll let Sky out because he believes in the Trinity, and like I think that's what's supposed a Trinitarian text. Go ahead, Sky out.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that in Philippians 2:5, it just speaks about the pre-existence of Jesus Christ as the Logos, the Word. So he pre-existed with the Father and the Holy Spirit as the one being of God, Yahweh. So Jesus has two planes of existences, one in heaven and one becoming the flesh. So in Philippians 2:5, you see that Jesus is in the form of God, and he lets all of his basically he leaves heaven, and God the Father sends him to become in the flesh. So he empties himself in that sense of divine power, but he never stops being God. So he just becomes a man. So I don't know real which way you're trying to go with that.
I was kind of looking at the chat and didn't quite catch all of that. So are you saying, say that again? I'm sorry.
I was saying that Philippians 2:5, it's called the incarnation. You can look this up. You can also look up the hypostatic union of Jesus having two natures of both fully man and fully divine. So he has two planes of existences, one in heaven and one on earth. He existed in all eternity as the Word, and then the Word becomes flesh in John 1:14. Through the incarnation, which is in Philippians 2:5, the Word became flesh, and he empties himself in a sense that he becomes a man. He doesn't stop being God. He just becomes a man in the person of Jesus Christ. So I don't know what's the issue with this verse.
So was the person that was Jesus, did he have all those godlike powers?
He is God.
So he is God, but did he have those powers? You just said that he didn't have those powers anymore, right?
He emptied himself to become a man.
He emptied himself, yeah, and that's kind of what Paul is describing. He chose to no longer have those powers. He chose to be a human being. If he's a human being, he's a fucking human being. He's no longer a god. He would be a god once he dies and transcends back up to whatever.
That's why I talked about the hypostatic union of his two natures. He's both fully man and fully God. He has two natures. He's a man. He was made lower than the angels. He was subject to the law. He did that on purpose because to be crucified. So but he never stopped being divine. He never stopped being God. So he just emptied himself in a sense that he was with God the Father, in a sense that he was the Word and he was with God. So he gave up all of his divine privileges with the Father to become a man, to become one of us, which is a little lower than the angels. And he was subject to the law to become one of us, to communicate. Get it?
I mean, no, not really. I don't get any of that crazy shit. So, all right. So this is fun. Have you guys ever heard of Jesus Benaria? Did I say that?
Yes.
I think it's Benaria.
Yeah.
So you understand that there's a lot of similarities to the story of that Jesus to the Jesus of Nazareth.
Yes. And I'd love to address that.
Well, and real quick, just one final question. Do you understand that this Jesus was alive in the 60s, 60, 80s, ADs? He was, and Josephus actually wrote about this man as well.
Yeah, absolutely. But
all right, so go ahead and make your point.
So Josephus walked with Vespasian, and not one mention of his miracles were mentioned in the writings. The belief that Vespasian had supernatural powers originated because after the conclusion of the Jewish wars, many claim that it was Vespasian who predicted in Jewish scripture to be the Messiah. It seems likely this interpretation of the prophecy was part of Josephus' propaganda campaign.
Also, now Josephus isn't credible. He's writing propaganda.
in his little area there, yeah, within his little cult.
I mean, that's really funny. So you're telling me that one of the major historical scholars that you Christians like to utilize to point out the historicity of Jesus was a propagandist and not to be trusted.
Well, because he was coerced by the Romans, like he was forced to. But I'm saying his writings of Jesus, I think, preceded the Romans' persecutions.
All right. So do you agree that Mark is probably using Josephus as a source?
I haven't really checked into that. I'm not sure.
All right, so I won't go to. I do want to stay on the other Jesus. So let's talk about the similarities here. Jesus, this other Jesus, Jesus Ben Area, is very similar to the story of the crucifixion. Now he wasn't crucified, but he was prophesying the end of the world, and this was during the siege of Jerusalem when they would have thought the world was ending. And he was prophesying the end of the world. Jews hand him over to the Romans for punishment. The Romans see nothing wrong with him. They release him, and then he's killed in the siege of Jerusalem. I think Richard Carrier pointed out 20 points to where these two stories are very, very similar. And then we are talking about, as my original point, when you talk about the burning of Jerusalem, the burning of all the records in 73 AD, then you have this vacuum to where you can mythicize these stories. So we have a very similar story of a person that Josephus wrote about existing, being, and then however many years later, now the very earliest would have been 73 AD that Mark could have been written, but most scholars think that it was probably a lot longer than that.
Not one of his miracles are mentioned in his writings, though.
In whose writings?
In Josephus's writings.
Exactly, because the miracles didn't happen, and historians didn't record that because they didn't happen. What happened was Josephus went and talked to Christians who, at that time, had this oral history of their religion, probably had scriptures written, but nothing made into a book, no gospels written yet. And so he talked to those Christians and wrote down what they told him. But yet Christians love to use Josephus as their historical proof for Jesus.
Well, I mean, it's not contingent on him. I mean, we don't need him. Like, he's not like necessary for the existence of Jesus. It's just something extra that people can consider.
Jim Majors makes a good point. Let me put that up here. TNS also document the miracles of Vespasian and their contemporaries, unlike Jesus. So, can you not see the conflict here when you have a very similar story? But before during the siege of Jerusalem, before the destruction of Jerusalem, before the destruction of all of those documents, you have a very similar story with Jesus Ben Area, and then all of a sudden you come up with this gospel, Mark. However long after that it was written, that incorporates a lot of that story into the crucifixion narrative, that would prove your character to be a god.
I'm sorry, what, can you repeat that?
So I'm basically saying, can you not see the conflict here when you had the destruction of the Jerusalem temples, all of their records, when in 60 AD, before that happened during the siege of Jerusalem, you had this figure, this Jesus figure, who had a very similar story to the crucifixion narrative that is reliant upon your Jesus being a god, that wasn't written for it probably about 20 years, for another 20 years after that point, after 73 AD. So like we have these stories about this Jewish Messiah, but they weren't really crafted until well over a full lifespan after Jesus died, after his apostles would have died.
Yeah, and Bart Ehrman's explained why is because they, through oral tradition, they overuse it.
I'm going to admit I haven't read his book. I read footnotes, summaries and shit.
So I'm going to defer to Ehrman on this, and I agree that there were these sources, these contemporary sources, but they were overused, and eventually they got degraded and crumbled away. So they had papyrus. Papyrus is very thin. And it easily degrades. So I'm saying, like, these type of criterias are way too, I think, unfair, especially when the Caesar himself has zero sources within like hundreds of years, and people consider him a real historical figure. So I'm saying once you apply the standards fairly with Jesus, and then you'll see it does work out that Jesus did exist, the biblical Jesus.
I'm not so sure. Like I think I've pointed out fairly clearly that there is at least reason to doubt the historicity of Jesus. Now I'm like 50-50. I'm not a mythicist. I used to claim mythicism before I really understood what it was. I think that there probably was a rabbi. I usually would call that person Yeshua. I understand that you probably won't find that in the Bible. I'm not saying you would, but it seems clear that these stories were mythicized, and I think most scholars would agree with that. Like as you were pointing out earlier, the consensus scholarship here agrees with the historicity of Jesus, but I think the consensus scholarship would not agree with the miracles and would tell you that these stories have been mythicized.
I'm gonna go ahead and put some stuff in the chat. You guys go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to respond to Jim Majors. He says as a mischaracterization, no. I'm going to quote it from his book right here. This is to the autographs being destroyed. So, and he goes, in point of fact, we have no knowledge what happened to the original copies of the New Testament. They were probably simply used so much they were wore out. This is not a scintilla of evidence to suggest that they survived until Nicaea or that they were destroyed afterward. Plenty of counter evidence. This indicates that they did not survive until Nicaea. There you go, Jim. No, it's not a mischaracterization.
I must have missed that little part. I should have invited Jim in on this, but we only got about a half an hour left. We can go a little bit longer if you guys are interested. So how do you explain that in Paul's letters, he seems to have no knowledge of what would come later in the Gospels? If Paul was receiving revelation from God himself.
I'm sorry, I was in the chat. I'm really sorry, Nuck. I know you hate repeating yourself.
No, I don't mind. I do it all the time, so don't worry about that. So it's really clear in Paul's letters, because Paul's letters were written in the 50s, and again, the very earliest Mark's gospel wouldn't have been written until after 73 AD. We can determine this by Mark speaking of the destruction of the Jewish temple. So how do you explain, if Paul was receiving direct revelation from God, then why doesn't Paul go ahead and give you what the Gospels are going to say? Because Paul doesn't mention any miracles. Paul doesn't mention the empty tomb. He doesn't mention Paul does not seem to understand what will come later. How do you explain that?
Well, number one, Paul had a mentor, a teacher that taught him all this stuff. So he
Wait, I thought he knew the apostles directly. I thought he got it right from them.
No, I mean, he might have, but no, there was actually had a mentor, a teacher. Let me get his name real quick. Everyone will know his name because I'm sure people.
Yeah, I'm sure I've heard it before. I just can't think. I just can't think of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's Gamaliel. So he had Gamaliel's tutoring that would have informed him about the Old Testament prophecies of Christ and he being the fulfillment of that, and then also the crucifixion. So I'm saying Gamaliel was the middle or the bridge to the knowledge that you're talking about.
So, but I mean, that doesn't really answer my question at all. Here, let me turn my camera back on. So that doesn't really answer my question at all. You believe that Paul was receiving direct revelation from God, do you not?
I don't know what I don't mean by revelation. You mean?
I mean, that's like Paul's own admission. Paul admits, like that's what he says. He was getting direct revelations from God. That's how he knows what he knows.
What do you mean, like a revelation in like a dream?
Like visions, like hallucinations. Like he clearly talks about this. Like I would have assumed that you'd be familiar with Paul's letters.
Yeah, I know, but I'm trying to understand what you mean by revelations. Do you mean like?
I mean, like visions. He talks about visions.
Okay.
He talks about God coming to him directly and giving him this information.
What information? I don't.
The information
only
about
thing
Jesus being real. All right, so Paul was a persecutor of Christians, but then he had an experience that changed him, right? Like this is what Paul writes. Paul writes that he had, you would say a vision, I would say a hallucination, and that converted him to Christianity, and it made him an apostle. Now, remember, Jesus handpicked his apostles, right? That's like a huge part of the gospel story. And yet Paul, who never met Jesus, was able to become an apostle because of these direct revelations from God himself. So why didn't Paul understand what would be coming later with the gospels? Why wouldn't he talk about the miracles? Why wouldn't he talk about the supernatural aspects of Jesus?
Are you kidding? Like Acts 9 and Acts 26 go into
That's
that
not by Paul. That's by Luke. And Acts came much later. Much later. You're talking about something written a long time after Jesus was dead.
No, I mean, Paul talks about his experiences with Jesus all the time. I mean, in many places. I'm not sure.
His experiences with Jesus, he never knew Jesus in life.
Of course he did.
No, he didn't. Dude, do you even understand your own religious history? Paul never met Jesus. Jim Majors in the chat, correct me if I'm wrong. Paul never met Jesus. Paul never met Jesus in life. He was not handpicked by Jesus to be an apostle.
He had a Christophany.
Yeah.
He had a what?
Christophany.
Like an epiphany? What are you talking about?
He met. He had like a revelation, a Christophany.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying here. So if he had a revelation right from God himself, Sky, how then would he not understand what would become later? Why wouldn't he speak to the miracles of Jesus? And why wouldn't he speak to the open tomb?
It was more on the subject of salvation, redemption, and sanctification more than the historical aspect. It was more about the eternal soul.
Are you admitting that God don't use his words right?
No, you're
you know this. I've told you this so many times, Knock, that 1 Corinthians 15 mentions his experience with Jesus. I mean, come on.
He never met Jesus, dude. All right, so let me get to where I have.
You read it. I'll read it for you.
No, in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul admits that according to the scriptures, these things are true. He never admits to meeting Jesus.
No, he actually does. Okay, so this is Paul talking. For I was delivered unto you, first of all, that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins through the scriptures, and that he was buried, and he rose on the third day, and then he was seen of Cephas, then of the 12. After that, he was seen of above 500 at once, of whom the greater part remain unto this present, but some are fallen asleep. After that, he was seen of James, then of the apostles, and then last of all, he was seen of me.
In Revelation. He never met him in life.
No, he didn't mention Revelation. He's with the 500. This is a physical testimony.
All right, so everybody in the chat, please tell me, am I just way off base here? Please tell me, everybody in the chat, yes. Did Paul meet Jesus in life?
Yes.
Because I mean, like, I'm fairly certain this is common knowledge here. I don't know where you're coming with this shit.
No, this is assumptions by liberal scholars that you get fed with this. And
so now it's liberal scholars aren't okay. When before your arguments were solely based on scholarship.
This is just from like Richard Carrier. You hear this stuff from.
Well, I studied a bit of Carrier today. Yes, I'm not going to lie. I also studied some Price. I did look at the footnotes of Berman. I was all over the place. I was trying to get as much. I wanted to have as much data outside of my own personal perceptions of reality, because when I'm talking about like the supernatural, that would be my main reason for not believing in the biblical Jesus, because I don't believe in the supernatural. I wanted to come with data.
So I'm going to share a link with you guys that William Lane Craig Lyons, he gives an argument, a syntactical argument and a hermeneutical argument that shows, yes, he did meet Jesus physically. I'm going to share it. I'm going to give it to you, Knock. I'm going to also share it to the chat. Just give me 1 second here.
Yeah, most of the 500 would have been dead before they met Paul. So I mean, this is scholarship right here. This is consensus. Is that Paul and Luke went and talked to the eyewitnesses. This is where Christians get their eyewitness testimony from, right? Yet we don't have any of those documents. We don't have any of those written testimonies from those eyewitnesses. We only have Luke, and we only have what Paul says. Now, I believe it's highly contested that these weren't actually written by Luke and Paul. When you're talking about Corinthians and Acts and all of that, that they were written much, much later. What we do have from Paul is his letters. Now, I've also mentioned that it has been proven that some of those letters weren't written by Paul himself, probably by a disciple of Paul, and that of the letters that were written by Paul, shit was added and taken out.
Well, you have to understand that Paul was writing all this stuff when he was in chains in Rome. He was writing to churches. He was writing to the Corinthians because he was in chains. He was writing to Timothy. He was writing to people about worshiping pagans and gods and things like that. So he's in chains. About Paul, meeting Jesus, there would have been no Paul if he didn't meet Jesus on Damascus Road. He would have been continuing to persecute Christians because that's what he was doing. He was Saul, and he was persecuting Christians. He hated Christians. So if it wasn't for the revelation and Christophany of Christ, he would have stayed blind, because that's what God did. He struck him blind until he met a woman in church who gave him his sight back, and then he became Paul, the apostle, and a very important figure in the New Testament.
He met a woman in church that gave him his sight back.
There was a part in the story, I think in Acts somewhere, where he goes back and he gets his sight back from I don't know, it's from a woman or something, but he gets his sight back, and then he becomes Paul. But if it wasn't for that, you can't just disregard the revelation, because it's very important. Because if it wasn't for that revelation and that speech that Christ gave to Paul, that he was persecuting Christians, he was persecuting Christ, that he would have never became the important figure that we know today.
All right, so Sky Out, you are admitting that Paul converted because of a vision he had of Jesus, of meeting Jesus on the Damascus Road after Jesus died, mind you. But he had this vision, right?
Yes.
Okay, so Joseph Smith also had visions. Why aren't you a Mormon?
Joseph Smith? No.
Yeah, he had visions. He had visions about the golden tablets. He had angels coming and talking to him directly. Yo, why aren't you a Mormon?
Well, you can say the same thing about Muhammad.
Sure, yeah. Why aren't you Islamic?
Yeah, because no, because you have to understand the actual context of the vision. Those I don't know what kind of visions you're talking about with those guys, but those are false visions. We're talking about the real vision.
Oh, those visions are hallucinations, right?
Yeah, those are false visions. You have to know the real vision.
So what's your evidence that Paul's vision wasn't a hallucination?
Oh, because he was persecuting Christians, and he would have continued to persecute Christians.
No, not if he had a very vivid hallucination. Like
there's other ways.
Like, I mean, there's no reason why he would switch over to believing in God for no reason, unless he had some sort of vision. So that's why I believe it.
But yeah, the road to Damascus, the people that actually heard the voice, they actually heard the voice. So it's not a delusion, because there's other people that saw or heard the voice.
I have taken some psychedelics. I have had some visions, and I have heard some voices. I don't, I'm not like Kathy in the chat here. I don't take that as revelation. I take that as I was fucked up. Now, I'm not saying that they were fucked up, but you can have hallucinations without taking drugs. Now, maybe they were, I don't know. But what you're describing to me is no different than Joseph Smith, no different than Muhammad, no different than countless other prophets of countless other religions. Why don't you believe those? Why do you believe this one?
We don't believe Christianity because of Paul's conversion. No, we believe Christianity on the totality of everything, of the evidence, historical evidence, everything. Prophetic evidence.
Prophetic evidence. So I mentioned what was it? I think it was the Corinthians shit. But I mentioned the archangel that was described as being the firstborn son of God, who had all of the attributes of Jesus well before Jesus was born. It seems like Paul probably took from these scriptures. He actually admits that he took from the scriptures and came up with this shit. Now, as I said, we have evidence that a lot of early Christians, sects, never thought that Jesus was a real man. They thought he was a celestial body, much like this archangel. So, like, we have all of these different things. You talk about circular prophecies. That's what that is.
Circular. No. Psalms 22 mentions even the clothes that would be gambled with for Jesus on the cross. While he was on the cross, they gambled for his clothes. He describes other details that are not, they're so specific. There's no way they could be made up.
Have you ever written a story?
Millions of times.
I mean, I've written a lot of stories, and trust me, authors take time to come up with every little detail. The little details is what makes a story, Praise.
That's 1,000 years beforehand that this.
Are you saying that they were ignorant and didn't know how to write stories? I mean, I admit that the Gospels is a pretty bad story. It's pretty bad compared. Who's using that fallacy you was talking about? You're applying your modern conceptions to the past now. I would probably maintain that back in the day those were pretty good stories.
You're gonna have to say that they concocted up a conspiracy and actually have a guy get crucified to fulfill something that happened 1,000 years before.
No, I'm not saying they concocted a conspiracy. So let me reapply my position here. What I think happened was that there was a real rabbi walking around Israel promoting a version of Judaism that might have been considered extreme. Right, might have been even considered rebellious by the Romans. And then what we had happen several years after this rabbi died was a siege on Jerusalem. We had the destruction of the temple, and we had a vacuum to where these stories became mythicized. That's my contention here, and I think history backs it up.
Those are non-Christian sects.
Crucifixion. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say those are non-Christian sects. The sects broke out. That there were just different cults basically.
What are you talking about? Non-Christian sects. What are you talking about in that regard?
They weren't part of Christianity. That's what I mean.
Who wasn't part of Christianity? Like the people that did what?
Let's see here. They had different sects. I can't remember which ones they were at the moment, but they were ones that were not a part of the Synoptic Gospels basically, and they were a part of.
Again, those Gospels came at least 60 years after the death of Jesus. At least, probably a lot longer than that. So what we're talking about with the early Christians, with the first Christians, they weren't really Christians. They were a sect of Judaism. They were Jews. Paul changed that. I think we all agree on that, right? Paul is the one that started preaching to the Gentiles, made it a religion that wasn't just for Jews.
Right. And
I thought you were still talking with him there. I'm sorry. What you guys?
I am enjoying this conversation. I know I'm a little heated, but I've wanted to talk about this for a while. I've been researching this for a while. I don't come to my positions usually without a lot of thought. I'm going to maintain. This is the first time I've ever had this conversation. I might have made mistakes in this conversation. I'll look it back. I'll look at the chat, see where I went wrong, and I'll look at it. And if I'm wrong about stuff, I'll probably adjust my positions. But I feel fairly confident here that the historicity itself, not talking about the supernatural aspects of it, the historicity of Jesus himself is a 50-50 thing, whether he ever existed or not. But actually, the point of this stream was, did the biblical Jesus exist? And that's kind of a different thing.
I was going to say, if you look up the Habermas, Habermas is the one who did. It was more concerning if Jesus Christ was resurrected, and we have evidence for that. Because if you disprove the resurrection, then you disprove Christianity. So if you actually do more research on the historical data of the resurrection, there's a whole bunch of evidence that he was resurrected. So he certainly existed historically. And I don't know
what evidence that he resurrected. I mean, outside of eyewitnesses that would have died long before it was ever written about.
Those eyewitnesses also died for believing. They're not going to make something up and then die for a lie. It just wouldn't make any sense. So like. These people
like you don't believe in other religions, right? So like that happens all the time. People die for religions all the time, and you are maintaining that those religions are false. So what you're saying here doesn't quite compute.
I'm talking about the evidence historically of Jesus Christ resurrecting in that sense. If you actually look at you said you're doing a lot of research. If you focus on the research of his resurrection, you'll see that there's a lot of evidence on his resurrection and him existing.
Like what? Because like what documentation do we have of zombies walking around when he died?
He's certainly not a zombie.
Yeah, I mean that's the straw man too.
Well, I mean, it's not. It literally spoke of that in the Gospels. When he died, the Jewish heroes of old rose from the dead. Those are fucking zombies.
I have Gary Habermas, who's a professor. He does all this extensive research. If you're having trouble finding historical information on Jesus, he actually battles Anthony Flew, who was a famous atheist for a very long time, and he compiles all. And Anthony Flew recently converted to just being agnostic because he had to go where the evidence leads him. He could not answer this evidence of Jesus Christ and the resurrection. So I'll definitely look at Anthony Flew and why did he change his mind from being an atheist to an agnostic after looking at the historical evidence of Jesus Christ and his resurrection.
I love it when people bring up former atheists. I personally don't believe much of that shit. Like, I think a lot of Christians say they used to be atheists just so they can claim to have an atheist perspective. I find now I do admit that it happens sometimes. I know somebody personally, Miss Sassy, went from being an atheist to being a Christian again. I just don't think it happens very often. I just really don't. But that could be my personal bias.
So you do know that we have prophecies out there, like we would have a rich man's tomb. That's Joseph of Arimathea. And this stuff was written 800 to 1,000 years beforehand.
I think that there's major contention that Joseph of Arimathea wasn't even a historical figure.
Says there's, of course, he's a historical figure. I mean, that's confirmed by all scholars, and that's one of the most.
Are you sure? I might be wrong about that, but I'm not. So I think that there's a huge debate whether that dude actually existed, and how did he get the body? Lisa for Truth was quite pointedly pointing out in the side chat that if you were crucified, you were a criminal. You did not get burials like that. How did he get the body? Did they just steal it? What happened to the Roman soldiers? Maybe it was the zombies had them distracted.
Do you know that how would they even know that Joseph of Arimathea was a tin man or tin farmer? So no, we have other historical sources to extra sources that give us this information.
Who?
Joseph of Arimathea. We found out he's a tin farmer. That's why
I know, but what's your historical sources that he existed outside of the Bible?
That's how I'm telling you right now. Like, how do we have historical information out there? So obviously there's historical sources.
Maybe I'm wrong about him. I don't know. Yeah, who cares? We're talking about Jesus. So before we go, let's talk about the Gospels. Let me get to it. Where do I have them? Because the Gospels themselves, we have Mark. It came first, but then you have for one, John was written by several people way later. So I don't even really want to count John. So let's talk about Mark, Matthew, and Luke. So Mark came first. Now we know that Matthew and Luke both pretty much just copied a lot of the stuff that Mark said. They also had stuff that Mark didn't have. And it's widely believed that Matthew and Luke copied off of each other. But there's also hypotheses out there about source Q, which would be an unknown source that Matthew and Luke would have been drawing from. But why did Matthew and Luke feel the need to have to pretty much copy everything that Mark said?
I don't subscribe to the Q theory. I have a whole new.
Neither do I. I think that Matthew and Luke probably copied off of each other.
Yeah, I'm gonna. I'll probably. This is the one. It's called the Fair Hypothesis. That's the one I subscribe to.
I don't think I've heard of that one. So, how do you pronounce that? And I'll research it next time I look into this. I didn't quite catch how you said it.
Oops, I'm sorry. Farrer.
All right. And that's the hypothesis. I'll look at that, definitely. I'm always willing to look at information, and I'm always willing to change my position. As I said before, I used to be a mythicist. I was a huge Carrier fan, but not only that, I watched a lot of Godless Engineer. I'm not anymore. I do hold the position that there probably was a rabbi that these myths were based upon. So, my argument isn't necessarily against the historicity of a so-called Jesus. It's against the supernatural bullshit in the Bible, which would obviously make it a story. And you can even go into the Old Testament talking about Samson having superhuman strength because of long hair or whatever. You don't believe that shit. You haven't seen that in your reality. And yet you do believe that shit. Despite not having seen that in your reality, you would have to prove to me the supernatural could exist for a biblical Jesus to be able to exist.
I can't see gravity, but I believe gravity exists.
Oh gosh, Sky, like you want to stop saying that. You really do.
Well, that's
Like,
a
yeah,
lot.
of course. I mean, of course,
That's
like
a lot.
gravity is a theory, but we know it exists because if I toss my hat up, the hat's gonna come back down.
You can't see gravity.
I see my hat come back down. That's gravity. You see gravity. Like, Newton didn't just create gravity. He tossed an apple up, right? And it came down and hit him in the fucking head. That's, demonstratable proof.
Yeah, but you don't have to agree with it. You can deny gravity.
Well, you can. You can also say the earth is flat. You'd be fucking stupid. But, like.
Yo, can you give me a cup of gravity? I don't think you can show me like gravity.
No, can I give you a cup of air? Are you saying that air doesn't exist?
Yeah, you can. You can test air particles. You can give.
Well, I just showed you how you test gravity. You throw something up, it comes back down. That's gravity, demonstratable.
That's the description of it. I want a physical specimen of gravity.
Well, do you have a physical specimen of air?
Yeah.
How?
Through particle. We can test like dirt particles and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just told you can test gravity. Throw something up, it's
about
not going to keep going up. We are rooted to the ground. So how does that happen if not for gravity?
So I'll put it this way: can you show reality is physical or materialistic? Can you show that or not? Can you give me a citation or some type of source that shows that?
Physical or materialistic? No, I didn't prepare for that question. I thought he was talking about Jesus.
That's been destroyed, right?
What?
That material is objectively physical or material.
Yeah,
Quantum mechanics blew that out of the water.
I'm not. I have no idea what you're talking about right now. I did not prepare for that. I'm talking about Jesus.
I was saying
talking about like physicalism. Yeah, materialism.
Materialism. What about it? I like materials.
So reality. Okay, here's a position that I think that you're presupposing or assuming that reality is fully physical and natural. And I would say no, that's not the case because that's been violated in quantum mechanics.
What? So you're saying the supernatural has been proven through quantum mechanics?
No, I'm saying that it can be.
It can be. So yeah. I'm a bit confused now because I don't think most physicists would be agreeing with you.
Well, no, I can just point you to experiments that have already been demonstrated. And one of them,
I mean, if you can prove the supernatural to me, Praise, I mean, that's always been my criteria. Like, prove the supernatural. So please do.
Sure, I would say through mental causation, the reality is objectively or fundamentally mental. And I'm saying that since that's the case, then there obviously that goes to a non-local observer who collapses all wave functions, and that would be the God of the Bible.
So you're saying that if you imagine it, it's true? I don't get what you're saying.
No, okay.
So what supernatural powers have been demonstrated that would lead you to believe that Jesus existed?
The non-local observer of quantum mechanics.
All right, I'll have to look that up because I've actually studied a little bit of quantum mechanics for other debates, but not in regards to this. I don't know where the hell you're trying to go with that.
Because you said that you didn't believe in the miracles of Jesus Christ and that you believe there's some sort of Jesus in somewhere, but you don't believe in the miracles. Is that what you said?
I said my position is that there was probably a rabbi, Yeshua ben Joseph, that walked around with a very radical, preaching a very radical ideology of Judaism. And that within a vacuum, a void of information, because Jerusalem was burned to the ground, and almost all of these stories were written after that, except for Paul's letters that never mentioned anything supernatural. That in that void, they mythicized this character and turned him into the biblical Jesus. That's my position.
About the miracles, though, so you don't believe he did no miracles?
No, I mean, I if he could turn water into wine, like I said, I want to learn how to do that. I'd be a rich man.
Can I give you a couple scholars' quotes on his miracles, Nock?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, we got about 10 minutes, so it'll be probably a good way to wrap it up.
So this is from Rudolf Bultmann. I think he's not even I think he's an atheist, but He goes, quote, doubtless he healed the sick and cast out demons. And here's another one from Walter Wink, and he's a theologian, scholar. I have no difficulty believing that Jesus actually healed people and not the psychosantic diseases. And here's one from E.P. Sanders. Almost indisputable, Jesus was a Chaldean who preached and healed. So
were all of these people alive to see Jesus do this shit? Have they ever seen anybody do that stuff?
We have evidence, so that's the case.
So let's talk about Jesus' ability to raise the dead. Why did not Paul talk about that in his letters?
He did.
I don't think he did. I don't think he did. Paul didn't mention any supernatural miracles. I read most of those letters today.
I think the issue is the fact that you're having a problem. It's non-material, because gravity is non-material, but it exists in our material world, just like miracles. So you cannot see a miracle just like you can't see gravity or logic. These things are non-material, but they exist in our material world.
You would have been able to see Jesus's miracles, right? Like, so if somebody's turning water into wine,
we did see it.
You'd see that.
Yeah,
if somebody's walking on water, you'd see that. If somebody's raising the dead, you'd see that. If somebody was healing the sick, you'd see that. We do not see that in society right now. We have plenty of people that have that pretend to be faith healers, and that shit's been thoroughly debunked. There's no evidence that works. There's none.
We can't see gravity, but we know that gravity exists.
You keep going back to gravity. Of course, yes, we know gravity exists. You can't see it. You can't see air either.
Well, then you have to grant that miracles exist, because
no, I don't. No, I don't, because I know for a fact that I have never seen a fucking human being come back after 3 days. I have felt the air on my face, the wind on my face. I can throw a hat up, it'll come back down. That's gravity. Demonstratable. It has to be demonstratable evidence, Skyle.
Have you seen logic? You haven't seen logic, but you know logic exists.
Logic?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you use logic when you think. So like the process of me thinking proves that, right? Like I don't know what you're getting at here. This is all apples and oranges. It has nothing to do with the supernatural. This is all within the natural world.
You would have to grant
quantum mechanics gives segue to that. There's a way that we can use quantum mechanics to demonstrate the supernatural.
You can also use quantum mechanics to prove the Big Bang Theory. Did you know that? Do you subscribe to those quantum mechanics?
Yeah, of course.
All right, so you can also use quantum mechanics to prove that there is a multiverse. Do you subscribe to that?
No, quantum mechanics.
No, you don't. No, you don't.
Actually, quantum mechanics could not be associated with the multiverse because they have different laws for each universe. So no,
you're wrong there. I studied that. I studied this for a recent debate. Yes, quantum mechanics is used, as well as string theory, and a lot of other things. Multiverse theory is a well-known theory that has a lot of evidence behind it. And yeah, exactly. But you don't subscribe. You only subscribe to the so-called quantum mechanics that you claim to prove the supernatural, and yet they don't. We have never proven the supernatural. Had we, give me that evidence, let me see it for myself, and I will change my stance on that.
Well, what is supernatural to you anyway? What does that mean?
Turning water into wine, calming a storm, like getting up on a boat, it's a storm, and you like, stop it, and it stops. That would be supernatural. Prove to me that can happen.
My proof would be the beginning of the universe, because how did the universe get here unless there's a supernatural, a transcendent being?
We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. Exactly, but we
cannot see before the expansion. So I have always granted that the possibility of a God exists. I don't think that it does, but maybe there was a God there. Then you would have to prove that God was Yahweh, and that Yahweh had a son and sent him to earth to be crucified and tortured. Doesn't make any logical sense. But I am granting you that maybe there was a God there to push that button to cause the Big Bang. Maybe. We don't know. We can't see before that. We can't see before the expansion.
There's no other way for it to be generated. That's why we have non-direct evidence.
Sure, there is.
That point to God.
Quantum mechanics, once again, has generated a way for that to happen. I have looked into that specifically. There's theoretically a fuel that would never run out, and quantum mechanics says that that's possible, and that fuel would have been used during the Big Bang, and that the Big Bang would have just continued and continued and continued, and that there's a plethora of universes out there. This is all multiverse theory. This is all within physics. And yes, they use quantum mechanics.
Well, there's also thermodynamics and Einstein's theory of relativity of how the universe got here. And if you understand the concept of thermodynamics and Einstein's theory of relativity, you would understand that the universe came from a singularity, and that singularity did not come from nothing. It came from a creator, came from a mind. Unless you're saying thermodynamics came from nothing, which is exactly what atheists are saying, because there's no God.
That's
I think most
philosophically
atheists. All
impossible.
right, so
It's fine.
my type of atheist. I claim. I think me and Daily Atheist came up, agreed with this on his show the other day. I'm like an agnostic atheist, right? Like I grant philosophically, I'm agnostic. I grant the premise of a God. I'm sitting here telling you that if you subscribe to the Big Bang Theory, like I do, that I have no evidence that a God wasn't there pushing that button to make it happen. I have no evidence of that, so I'm not going to sit here and argue against that. My argument is about the biblical Jesus and the supposed miracles that he has committed, and which is physically impossible to do. A human being cannot walk on water. We have weight. There's density. You're going to sink. It's going to happen. Gravity is going to take place. Gravity. I know you guys can't see it. Don't want to believe in it, but it's there.
Possible. I don't even think there is such a thing as physicalness anyway. That's what I would say is a concept.
Are we going to go Jim Carrey right before we end praise? I mean, all right, so I do want to thank you guys. You've both been a good sport. I want to give you guys time to chill your channels. We only have a few minutes left. This was a heated conversation. I want to apologize for the Daily Atheist for not making it apparently abundantly clear what this was going to be about. So I'm going to bring him on for that one-on-one to interview him about his channel. This was good. I'm going to look back at it. I'm going to see where I went wrong. I don't think that I did, but I'm Nakasuchi. I always make mistakes. So I want to thank you both for a good conversation. I thought this was excellent.
Yeah, I enjoyed it, Doc. Every time I come on, I enjoy. I like because you actually sharpen my arguments. But I mean, I appreciate that you're genuine and like you're not just like easily fooled and like these other people that just believe something. I respect that.
I appreciate that, man.
I also want to thank you again, Knock, and I do want to add one more thing. It is possible that Jesus did perform all those miracles, and he could exist in the knowledge you don't have. Because God could exist in the knowledge you don't have, and I hope that one day you receive Jesus Christ in the knowledge you don't have and receive His revelation. And thank you for having me on the show.
And I will grant you that there is an infinite amount that I don't know. I'm dumber than a lot of people, but just the human race doesn't know. So maybe one day in the future we will prove the supernatural. I'm just saying for me to believe it, I need demonstrable proof. So for me, when I hear stories about the biblical Jesus, it's obviously been mythicized, and I think consensus scholarship agrees with that.
You do know that's an argument for ignorance, though, right? At least if you can concede that, I'm fine with that.
I mean, yeah. I mean, if not having proven something yet is an argument, so like the flat earthers, or in anything like, we hadn't before Newton thought of gravity, right? Like we are always finding new information. We are always pushing the boundaries. Science it never stops. It never stops. And I see my favorite cupcakes up in the chat. What's up, Matt Powell? But it never stops. So yeah, I grant the possibility. Maybe one day we'll prove the supernatural. We haven't as of yet. And that's the only thing I can go based upon.
Yeah. Okay. I hope that, she'll come to that understanding, but I'm saying like you don't.
I mean, if it's going to be a revelation from God, I won't accept that. If it's some voice in my head, I'm going to go try to get some Prozac.
Yeah, I understand your viewpoint. I understand that, but I'm saying that you don't necessarily need to see a miracle to believe, because how would you even trust your own what you see is true? How would you even justify that?
Sorry, my daughter was talking to me. Repeat that.
Oh, I was just saying, like, I understand, like, you have to see a miracle to believe it, but I mean, my question is, like, how would you even verify what you seen was not a delusion and true?
Well, all right. So let's real quick before we end. Now, let's say a person's child is trapped under a car, right? And that person in the moment is able to lift that car and pull that child out. That this has happened, right? We know that that's not a miracle. Like maybe back in the day, Samson doing it, they thought, hey, that's supernatural. That's superhuman strength. We know that that's adrenaline. And in these moments, things happen. And we know that there's physical reasons for that. And we're able to prove that. That's what I'm saying would need to be done when it comes to the supernatural.
Yeah, I'm just saying you have to presuppose that what you saw was true. And I'm saying without God, you can't even justify anything as true in your worldview.
That's a whole other debate that we've had before, Praise. And next time I bring you on, we'll have it again.
Yeah, sure, man. It's a lot of fun. Just anytime, man. Just email me. I'll be in here.
Yeah, we got to have a part 2, man.
Yeah, we will. Maybe next time I'll bring Jim Majors on or GE or somebody that has more of a like I said, I've been researching this for a while. This is the first time I've ever really talked publicly about this position. So I'm sure I've made mistakes. I want to thank both of y'all for coming on. Before we end, show your channels and Praise. I will get your link in the description as soon as we're done.
Yeah, so I have my channel and I discuss apologetic issues. That's the whole thing is means to defend the Christian worldview, and that's what I'm into. So I mean that's basically what I do. So
yeah, and I'm glad that we're getting along again.
Yeah, a lot of fun, man. You're a very charismatic person to talk to, genuine. I love talking with you.
Thank you, Praise. Thank you, man. I really enjoy talking to both of y'all. Even Skyout, I like the new reiteration of yourself. You're not really coming on trolling like you used to. I thought you held your own in this conversation, so I'll give you some props for that. Although the gravity thing was like, eh.
Oh no, I was just going with the logic of miracles and logic. You can't see them, but they still exist in the material world. But so do miracles. But I was going to say thank you for having me on the show, man. I want to do another one on Moses, whether or not Moses existed, because I know Jim Majors and I were supposed to do that, but it never happened. So maybe we could talk about that next time. But I appreciate you having me on the show, man.
I would love to have that conversation. Yeah, we'll bring Jim on for that. If he's available. I know he's been going through some shit. Thank you. Did you show your channel, Scott?
Oh yeah. If anyone wants to check out Skyout's channel, it's a Christian apologist channel. We talk about various issues and whether or not, if you want to come on the channel and take a look at it, it's something to look at. And I have a lot of work on there. I'm looking into doing some more work and maybe updating it soon. So come check it out sometime when you get a chance. Thank you.
All right, yeah, I want to thank you both for coming on. I want to thank this one guy for coming on. I'm going to have this one guy back on just so we can flesh out his position, because his position was a bit weird. You weren't here, Skyout. He believes that Jesus didn't exist yet, which I think is more of a Richard, which is more kind of like Richard's stance, Richard Mattson.
Yeah, I didn't catch that.
So yeah, I'm going to bring him on. We'll have that conversation. And maybe he'll have more time and we can actually flesh out where he's coming from on that. I want to thank everybody in the chat for being here. Hopefully I didn't butcher this conversation. I think I did pretty well. I think I did pretty good. I do have my Patreon screen now. I just don't have it as an outro for this yet. That will be the next stream. So I want to thank all of you for being here. As always, be the conversation, discuss God, all of that stuff. See you soon.
Black Lives Matter.
Black Lives Matter.